And I just shared those links in the chat. So hello, and thank you for joining us today for Strategizing Your Funding Search. I am Chris Hawks, Vista Training Specialist with AmeriCorps in Washington, D.C., and I'll be the host for today's webinar. With those links just shared to the chat, one of them says page not found while the other two work. The link works, or if you copy and paste it. I believe it's the first one. You have to copy and paste it. Sorry, I just realized that when I was trying to test it out, but when I copy and pasted it into my browser, it worked. But I'll try to get that corrected in just a second. But just looking here at today's agenda, so you'll see we'll be focusing on the following session goals. And as you can see, this is really focused on the searching aspect, on a search for funding, not necessarily on writing grants. Saw a few of you mention grant writing as part of your bad activities. We do have a separate recorded webinar on writing a grant, and we'll address that actually a little bit later on. But as you can see here, our agenda is to develop a search strategy to find the best potential funders for your project, to organize information that will inform your organization's decisions about approaching funders, to identify opportunities for in-kind support as well, look into. But first up is our main speaker, Mo Hyman, who we're super happy to have today. So Mo is the founder and executive director of College Access Plan in Pasadena, California. She is an experienced fundraiser who also served as a facilitator for the Vista Online courses in resource development and volunteer mobilization. Mo has also served as a Vista supervisor at CAP, or CAP, for a number of very talented Vista members who exceeded expectations and completed a successful Vista project. So Mo, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Making sure that I can be heard. That's good. Looks like my microphone is jamming out, so that's great. Hi, everybody. It's so great to be with you here today. So let's just hop right in and get started. And we can, like Chris said, we'll do a short Q&A at the end of the session. So during this webinar, we will cover 3 key areas that most Vistas are likely to focus on during the fund development process, specifically what you can do to prepare for your research, where you can find potential funding opportunities, and once you find these opportunities, how you can determine if they are appropriate for your organization to pursue. While actually writing a proposal or managing a grant may end up on your plate, those are not going to be the focus of today's session. And so you'll see that on the screen in front of you, sort of what the 1, 2, and 3 is that we're focusing on today. These steps in the funding process should involve your executive director or development director if you have one. And the Vista campus has many resources on those phases if you want to continue your learning once we get beyond these first 3. So today we'll stay focused on the research part of the funding process. All right, so now we get this exciting part where I'm going to share my screen with you really quickly. But as a starting place with research, it's good to get your organization systems in place so you can document what you will find. A spreadsheet can help you do this, and you've been provided with this sample, and you can copy it into your own drive and then edit and delete it and do whatever you need to as helpful. Often funders will have templates and guidelines available for download on their website. And to ensure that you or the grant writer has all the key files down the road, you can use a shared Google Drive folder to organize them in and link it to your spreadsheet or Dropbox or whatever your organization is using to share files. Remember that a spreadsheet is a live document. You can use color coding or reorganize your cells by priority areas or whatever you want to do to make it easy. It's not just fixed in time. And okay, so I am going to, I think, share my screen right now. Yep, looks like that's getting ready to happen. Here we go. I just wanted to show you this document a little bit in live time. So as you'll notice, there's a couple of different, let me see if I can move. I have this bar in my way. Okay. So from left to right, you'll see that you put the name of the funder. I have a couple of foundations, the blah, blah foundation, clearly not real. When you think you might want to submit the date, and I've included little instructions, these little corners, you can say this is the internal target date for submitting an LOI, I mean your letter of inquiry, grant proposal, or RFP, and et cetera down the line. So from left to right, due date, and I give you little hints as you go through. Last thing I want to show you is that under funder type and ask strategy, I've actually given you drop down menus so you can choose the type of funder. And ask strategy, you can see what kind of funding you think you're going to ask for. And when we get, I wanted to point those two things out of you because we will talk about both funder type and ask strategy today. As you go right, funder website, contact information, and links to your Drive folder, and then notes. And we'll come back at the end if time is permitting and take a look at what you might put in some of those notes after we've talked about your strategy. Okay, so now I am going to stop my screen share and pop it back. Thanks, Jeff. All right, so now we're going to, hopefully that gives you some context for how you might organize your research once you have it. So we're going to talk for a little bit about how we're going to conduct that research, and then we'll come back later to that organization. But I wanted to introduce it to you up front because it's good for me to have a visual in my head as I go through. So the first step in creating your strategy is to determine the answer to the question, what type of funding should I look for? And the three main types of funding that you will seek and that are covered in this webinar are foundation funding, private foundations, community foundations, and the like, corporate funding from corporate foundations or from corporate non-foundations, just from the corporations themselves, and then government funding. And we'll also touch on in-kind, which sort of overlaps with these three categories. Your organization likely also seeks direct donations from individuals, but that's not the focus of today's discussion. Okay, so research. We're going to pause here for a second and think about the current funding landscape because, as you know, 2020 has been pretty insane and fundraising looks pretty different in a lot of ways. So were we doing this webinar at a different time, it would look a little bit different because COVID has offered a lot of challenges, but actually some opportunities for fundraisers as well. Funders know you won't have a big gala in your pocket and that individual giving is really up in the air right now. So they might not prioritize those as expectations of your grant. Many have changed their focus, however, so don't assume they're going to give in exactly the same categories in exactly the same ways as they always have. For example, you're in good shape if you do COVID response or basic needs work, but the rest of us has seen dollars admission and diminish in other areas. So for example, I've seen dollars diminish in education, but increase in food security. So, and we don't know what the next year is going to bring. It's a great time to check in with longtime funders, the ones that you have a really strong relationship with, and urge them to sustain their support of your organization because they know you the best and they know your programs. And now is a good time to push for multi-year funding from those foundations that you do have relationships with. I think they understand that we're all facing some questions around stability, and it's not a bad idea to encourage them for multi-year grants. So conducting deep research and having a very clear strategy can open doors that might otherwise be closed in the current funding environment. So it's more important than ever to understand the priorities of funders as well as the priorities in your organization. Yay, we have a poll coming up. I love a poll. So on your screen, you should see a poll. And it's asking, how familiar are you with current and recent funders in the organization where you serve? Is it A, not at all, B, a little bit, or C, very familiar. So select the answer that best fits your familiarity, and let's see what we come up with.
What's your, we'll give it a few seconds as the poll results come in. Curious, Mo, what you think will be the highest percentage in terms of...
If I had to bet, I would bet, and if you're on your phone, by the way, I'm sorry, the polling feature is not available. So I see some people asking where it is. You might be on your phone. If not, the poll should have popped. For me, it's just like right there in front of me. It's popped up on my screen. So I think we're going to get a lot of little bits. That's my feeling.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And to follow up on Mo's comment, if you are on a mobile device and don't see the poll, you can just type your answer in the chat. So not at all, a little bit, or very familiar. So we just give it another couple seconds as this closes, and give it a little drum roll, and it is closed. Oh, so yeah, that was correct. We had 59% at a little bit.
What do I win?
Yeah. I will send some chocolate goodies.
I'm down. So as we start talking about research, we're going to help you gain a fuller understanding of your organization's existing funding ecosystem. So hopefully that little bit, maybe you'll have a plan by the end of this webinar. In the next half hour, you'll start to gain a plan around how to change that little bit to a very familiar. But I'm glad to see that 16% of you are already very familiar. So later on, you can share how you got there. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about, before you start, about the research that you're going to conduct. And in the wide world of foundations, where really we're going to focus a lot of our energy, you want to know what support your organization already has in place, or what it has received in the last few years, because that will really help you to strategize your search. Be sure that you know where you stand with funders. You don't want to duplicate work or chase dead ends. You certainly don't want to go to a funder where you're in cycle, or where you've been asked to take a year off. A lot of funders will ask you to take a gap year before coming back. Maybe you get 2 or 3 grants in a row, and then you have to take a gap year. So make sure you know where you are. And also, if you've been, also know whether or not you've had a grant denied, or specifically denied within the last year, because a lot of funders will ask you to take a gap in that case as well. You may also wish to talk to your organizational leadership about any funders to whom they wish to return after a gap. And now that priorities at that funder, or even within the organization, have changed, sometimes a funder will, their boards will change what their focus is, and then they'll change it back, or they'll change it from not a good fit for your organization to becoming a good fit. So this is a conversation you can have with your organizational leadership. And next, be sure you know what you want to fund. Are you looking for COVID relief funding? Are you looking for program specific or project funding? Are you looking for general operating funds? And we'll pause for a moment to talk about those things. And then finally, some funding is restricted, so just be sure that you plan to use the funding in the way that you ask for it. So let's talk about what some of those kinds of funds are. Briefly, here's some context for the types of resource funding your organization might seek. You'll see that here: core support or general operating support, which is awesome because it's unrestricted, and more funders are really seeing the value of giving unrestricted grants. So you can kind of put this money where you most need it. Capital funds include funding a building, which is what a lot of people think of with capital funds, but it also can include technology, vehicles, a new air conditioning unit. And I think right now a lot of funders are recognizing the importance of technology grants. So given that people are largely working from home and probably will be for a few more months. Capacity building, obviously you as Vistas understand the value of building capacity, and sometimes you can get funding from a foundation to link to that Vista support, that growth within your organization. Program development and support, so for exciting new direct service programs or the existing ones that you have. And then finally, the category of program evaluation to support an internal or external evaluation of a specific program or of your organization overall. In-kind donations, and we'll come back to this in a few minutes, are non-cash goods and services and will more than likely come from corporations like printers from Hewlett Packard, or local businesses like donated coffee for an event. And pro bono services, so there's goods and services. Pro bono services are another type of non-cash support. So these types of donations come in the form of like a design firm donating free graphic design services. And the good news during COVID, yes, there is good news. Many funders are coming around to the idea of flexible general operating core support funds. So really my only piece of useful advice today is, if a funder says that they happily fund general operating, don't bother asking for program specific fundings. General operating requests are usually a little bit less work, and certainly they're more malleable funds. You can use them wherever you want. So that is what I always say, is why go for program specific if you can make it easy on yourself? Cool. So we're going to pause on foundation funding for a while, because this is sort of the most opaque part of the process. Where do I find foundations, and how do I know whether or not they're open to giving to my organization? So here are the main sources of information we're going to cover today, spending the most of the time on Foundation Center, but I'll also talk to you, actually it's pretty equally distributed, about Guidestar and how to use other organizations' websites in your strategic fund development. And then briefly, we're going to touch on government grant sites, because we know that that's something that your organization will be considering. So the foundation, I love the fade, the slow fade. It's very, I'm impressed by very small things. So we're going to start in the researching using the Foundation Center. Feel free to shove in the chat if you've ever used the Foundation Center, but we're going to talk about it if you're not familiar with it. So the database, this is a database of like a zillion grantors, and key details about each funder, including whether they accept unsolicited proposals, areas of foundation interest, assets, annual giving, how much they give a year. Seeing some people say they've used this, but the Guidestar, they haven't used that. So I'm really glad that there's some familiarity. Hopefully you're going to use all of these things in tandem. So a few warnings: Foundation Center Online is not free, but your organization may already pay for it. There are many nonprofit resource libraries and even public libraries that provide free access to the Foundation Center Online, and you can search for locations right on the Foundation Center website. The tool can be a little tricky, but on the next slide, we'll look at some search terms to guide your search. So when you're searching with keywords and search terms, you have to be patient. This is a search term or keyword search engine. And depending on where you live or what you do, you can get way too many returns, like I'll never get through all these, or way too few. So the key terms on the right side of this graphic might be helpful to guide you for terms that match your organization's current funding needs. So play around with these terms and coordinate the search further by using your geographic location. If you live in a less populated state like Wyoming, you probably want to search statewide, whereas I live in the Los Angeles area in California, so I need to really just look for funders that fund Los Angeles County, because California is obviously such a populous state. So a youth serving organization in Los Angeles is going to get a lot of results, while a basket weaving club in Duluth, Minnesota might return only a few. And in the latter case, you probably want to try a broad keyword search, maybe putting in arts, looking for the arts and foundations in Minnesota in total, or something like that. So just think about, it's all about strategy, but just play around with these key words. And in some cases, you're going to want to use the big words like youth. And in some cases, you're going to want to use the words in the right-hand column that have more specific terms like education or technology education or something like that, depending on the number of funders in your area. All right, so that's Foundation Center for you. We're going to talk about Guidestar. It looks like a number of you have used Guidestar. Guidestar collects information on all nonprofits. It's totally my favorite tool. It includes foundations. Here you can download Form 990s, or the tax forms that all nonprofits, including foundations, are required to submit to the IRS every year, and get a sense of budget and organization supported by the foundations. All this information is found on Guidestar. A couple things to be careful about especially when you're using a 990. A lot of us go download the 990 and scan directly to the end. We're so used to doing this, and we just see a list of all the organizations that funder has supported, and that's really exciting to see. One thing that you should remember is that a lot of foundation board members have discretionary funds, and that means that they can give a donation, and it might be a larger donation, $10,000, $20,000, to any organization that they want, and it doesn't have to be within the funding priorities. So I would always match the information you find on Guidestar and in the 990 with what you find in an online search, even a Google search, or certainly if the foundation has a website, that's the best place to go. So sometimes you have to use these tools in tandem, but it's kind of fun to look at Guidestar and see this information. The other thing is that sometimes some funders will actually put the focus of their giving in a line in one of those. It's in one of those first 5 or 6 pages of the 990. You'll see that they'll actually say, we are interested in giving to educational organizations that serve underserved students in these categories, or something like that. And the great thing about Guidestar is free access is provided when your organization has an active and up-to-date account. Otherwise, you have to pay, but I'm telling you, no reason to ever have to pay. So I strongly suggest that every organization has an updated account to the highest platinum level on Guidestar, if at all possible. And the platinum level requires that you add updated information on staffing, budget, programs, outcomes. Some funders have even stopped requiring that organizations submit a 990. They just ask for you to make sure that your 990 is uploaded to Guidestar. So because it is such an important tool, one thing that you can do is make sure that your Guidestar is updated in the current year. And if it's not, January of a new year is a perfect time to update it. So go to whoever has the responsibility to do that in the organization and make sure that happens. It's a little bit less searchable of a tool than the Foundation Center, but it's free and there's a lot of information on it, and you really can use it in tandem with Google search or research you do by visiting other organizations' websites, which we're going to talk about in a second. So as we move to that, you'll start to see how these things might look together. This is my organization's website, and you'll see we have our investors, or the foundations that fund us. So you could take the list of foundations from a website like ours and take those funders and plug them into Guidestar or plug them into Google and start using these resources in tandem. What organizations do you think you should look at? Whose websites? I would say look for regional or local organizations that have similar mission area of expertise, similar stakeholder groups, similar budget size is always a good thing. It's sometimes hard to compare your funding if you're an organization that has $1 million budget and you're comparing yourself to an organization with a $50 million budget. And then similar projects, similar work going on, but just start nosing around who's in your ecosystem. Most organizations have an Our Donors type page, and sometimes they'll list their annual reports. And the great news is that a lot of us are doing electronic annual reports now. Ours is a page on our ours is on our website. So it's really easy to find things that used to be a little bit more buried. And once you've identified foundations with which you are not previously familiar, you can then go back and see whether they're on Guidestar or Foundation Center online, or look for whether or not they have websites online, which is probably the most important thing that you can do in your search, is just always check for a website first. So just to do a little bit of wrap up, quick recap. Once you identify a foundation in which you're interested, check and see if they have a website. read all the pages very thoroughly, and use their word as gospel. Super duper important. Many foundations do not have websites, but some of the key information you need, like whether they accept unsolicited proposals if they don't have a relationship with an organization, may be listed both on their 990 or on somewhere like Foundation Center Online. And finally, your executive director or development director can call organizations with which they're familiar or with whom they have relationships, and try to get the inside scoop on funders. I'm telling you, as an executive director, we all share details about our funders. We all know, we're all friends in our corner of the world in College Access and Success in Los Angeles. I know every single organization, and we share information about funders. We talk to each other. I talk to other youth serving organizations here in Pasadena, and we get the inside scoop, and we do share information with each other because we do want to support each other's work. All right, so taking a breath, moving on to government funding. This is going to be a really brief part of our conversation, and that speaks a little bit to my lacking information about government funding. I don't go after a lot of government funding, and this is something for which there's a lot of publicly available information. But GrantWatch collects RFPs focused on local, state, and federal grants. You can get the gist of government grants without paying the fee, but it is a fee-based service. But what I do is I creatively Google after I get the pertinent RFP information, like what, for example, if there is something that HUD or the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development is putting out, then GrantWatch will give you sort of that basic information, and you can just go to the HUD website and they'll have their RFPs listed. So often government entities will just have stuff on their websites, but it's not very strategic to go to every single government department website to see if you can find funding opportunities. So GrantWatch and then grants.gov are really good places to get this information. And then you can kind of creatively troll around the department websites from there to see if you can find further information. All of this information is available for free. You just sort of have to have a good strategy and a good plan to get it. So we're next going to talk about corporate funding. Corporations can be a little bit tricky. When researching a corporation, use Google to find out if the corporation has a corporate sponsored foundation or a corporate direct giving program. Those are two sort of different things. Corporations provide support to nonprofits through direct giving programs or foundations. And company-sponsored foundations are separate legal entities. They're their own foundations. So therefore, they have to have a 990 with the IRS, and they're a little bit easier to find out information about using Guidestar and finding their 990s. Corporate direct giving programs can be called corporate social responsibility programs or something else, and they're not legal entities like foundations. They're sometimes an arm or department of a company, and they include employee matching gifts. So if one of your donors gives a gift to your organization, it is possible that the corporation for which they work will match it, which is a good thing to know. And there are Googleable lists of corporations that give matching gifts out there. A lot of other corporate funding includes in-kind gifts. Like my example about a printer from HP earlier, volunteer programs sometimes look like they want to send 10 volunteers out for a one-day event, and then they'll give you a couple $1,000s as a thank you gift. They're not bound by the same laws as foundations, these corporate direct giving programs. So the information can be a little bit harder to find. And sometimes it helps to use relationships that people on your board might have, or those donors that are doing employee matches. If they're really engaged donors, they might help you get a little bit deeper into the corporate giving. And the resources listed on this slide are good places to start to identify how a corporation might give to your organization. Businesses and corporations are often really good sources of in-kind gifts. So we'll dig into that in a second. But first, we're going to pause and do another chat. So I can breathe and you can stop listening to me for 1 second. everything we've discussed so far relates to cash grant opportunities. And so we're going to talk for a minute about non-cash resources, those goods and services that can increase your organization's capacity. So let's learn about each other's experiences with garnering these in-kind resources. In the chat box, please let us know, have you ever sought in-kind non-cash resources? If so, what were you able to secure? Was it free coffee, event space, computer software, furniture? From what type of a donor? Local, mom and pop, large corporation, another nonprofit, TechSoup, something like that. How did you locate the resources? What did you use? Google? Did you walk in the door? Did you call them on the phone? Did you use an online form? Cool. We're seeing some of you haven't done it yet, and some of you really have. That's cool. 100 gift cards.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just going to mention, yeah, there were a lot of no's. No, I haven't been able to. Nope. But yeah, there are a few mixed in here. Some, yes, vegetables from a local donor. Secure a tool trailer for our local Habitat for Humanity. Discounted hardware from TechSoup. Free Christmas decorations. To decorate another one for Habitat for Humanity, home dedication last week. So that's a good timing for the webinar. But yeah, a lot of no's coming in. So just kind of sifting through, did see the free coffee and gift cards that you mentioned. You see any others, Mo, that are standing out? I'm scrolling through, and here come a few more.
A lot of food donations. I love the carpenters, electricians, and plumbers to remove unused furnace. I know my organization has had big stuff that we're like, oh, how do we get rid of this? We can't lug it down the stairs. So I love that one. Event space, that's a big one that a lot of organizations seek. That's great. Donate a van. Wow. So these are really good. Yeah. So as we've learned from the group, keep throwing your answers in for everybody to see. We're going to move on to the next slide, but I hope that you keep adding your answers, because I think that your fellow Vistas are probably learning a lot, getting a lot of ideas. I'm getting a lot of ideas. Thank you. I'm going to ask somebody to come take heavy things out of my office for sure. So as we learned from the group, we saw all of the examples go by: TechSoup, tools or resources, free space, pro bono support. And some people said they used email and online support, local businesses, big corporations. You really are covering, we're really spanning the gamut. So in a handout for this webinar that we've shared with you, you'll see a chart with all this information and more about some places to begin looking for information. I saw that a couple of people used TechSoup. That's a place where you can get free software or hardware for your organization. That's a great place to go in a time where people are using technology very heavily. And really, since there's no one place to go for this stuff, you're just going to have to start Googling again. But one of the great things that you can hopefully share with each other is some strategies. Where do I look, and what do the asks look like? And also, how might I be asked to make this request? It's going to be an online form, an email. You might just walk into a grocery store and talk to the manager, and you can get gift cards or 2-for-1 gift certificates from a local branch of a sometimes the local version of a national restaurant will give 2-for-1 cards or something like that. So when working locally, just make sure to be strategic. Sometimes it's better than to get something totally free to build a mutually benefit relationship over the years. So you might be able to get that free coffee once or twice, but eventually in tough times like now, that coffee shop might start ignoring your request. Whereas when you make a deal that's mutually beneficial, 50% off for coffee and you pay for it, and you can put it up on your website as a partnership, sometimes the local organizations really appreciate that. So just be strategic. And regarding the IRS, just don't get stuff you don't need, because you can't give it away to just anyone. Nonprofits in particular, there's rules regarding if you are with a nonprofit organization to whom you can transfer access. So if you get a bunch of free desk chairs that you don't need. Now you've got to find another nonprofit organization with a similar mission to give those chairs to. And that's harder than it might seem. And remember, finally, that things like computer and printers and furniture are assets. And so transferring assets, there are rules governed around that. Okay. Breathing, strategize your approach. Now we're getting into the third major part of today's presentation, a third and last. So from here, I'm going to support you in two things. First, using the spreadsheet I shared earlier to collect information to share with the grant-seeking partners at your organization and to help you consider when and whether to approach a funder. So as you gather intel through research, you'll fill in the spreadsheet and collect key details like RFPs or requests for proposals is what that means, where to apply information. Remember, the spreadsheet is a living document, but you'll hit a point where you feel ready to share this document and your findings with whomever you're going to be working with in your organization on request. So first, look at your research and determine whether or not a funder is a good fit. Do you recognize any of the organizations that they fund? Do their interests seem to be geographically lumped in a particular area of the country or of the county or region? Do you fit into that? Are they currently accepting proposals? Really important to look at. Have they recently invested in the type of funding that you seek with the type of organization that you have? And if you seek general operating funds, but they seem to have only given program-specific funds, for example, this is an example of what might happen, then note on the spreadsheet, okay, they say that they take general operating requests, but it looks like they're really focused in the last few years on program-specific funding or something like that. This is a great question that you can later ask on a follow-up call with the foundation. So anything you can put in the notes that might help whoever would make that call to make it really can streamline the process for the organization. So now we're going to talk about how much. When you're deciding how much money to suggest, consider. Remember that you're building a new relationship. Foundations usually won't fund more than 10% of a total budget for general operating, and they will not fund a full project or more than half of a project or program. So be thoughtful about how much you request based on the intel you've gathered, and maybe make a recommendation to your executive director or development director about what amount you think that should be based on how much funding you've already raised. Don't forget to plan to share these details in any funding request, other funding you've raised for the same or similar purpose. And in figuring out how much to ask for, consider the size of grants the funder has made to other organizations with similar projects. So a deeper dive here is maybe pick a few like-seeming organizations and pull their Form 990s from Guidestar. How big are their grants versus the size of their budget? And don't jump the gun and say, oh, this foundation funded this other organization with a similar mission for $100,000, so that's what we'll ask for. But remember that budget size can impact this amount. So if they are a larger organization than yours, then you might want to ask for a smaller amount. And also that organizations might have a longer standing relationship with the funder. If you are a much larger organization than they are, then the opposite might be true. They might be willing to come in at a higher amount. So finally, be prepared on your strategy spreadsheet. Be prepared to make a clear case for how much funding you think that your organization should ask for. Yay, poll time. All right, so our question is, should you call a foundation before submitting proposal? Always? Never? It depends. I have no idea. What do you think, Chris?
I think with any kind of question like this, I would always go with it depends. And that's just my go-to answer if that's available. So that's my vote for what's going to be number one.
Great. Oh, I see that somebody gave us Grant Seeker as a tool. Put that in your toolbox. That's a great one that I haven't been able to cover today. Okay, so.
Yeah, and
Chris,
just to, I was just going to say, if you don't see the poll, by all means, jot your answer in the chat. But looks like most have been able to answer through the poll, so we could probably close it out. Another couple of seconds. Okay, there we go.
Well, Chris, it looks like you're winner, chicken dinner on that one.
Nice.
Or veggie chicken dinner if you're me. So unless a foundation says explicitly not to call, always call. This was a little bit of a trick question because it's sort of a mix between it depends and yes. It's best if your leadership makes first contact, if at all possible. I noticed that somebody earlier was saying that the development director left the organization, so now they are the whole development department. I saw that go by early on. So that's the kind of thing where you might want to sit down with the executive director and ask first if they would like to make that call or if they would like you to make it. And really your job is to set up whoever is going to make this call for success. So once again, quick review. Except for in very, very limited circumstances where the foundation says, don't call us, just submit a proposal, you should always make a phone call before submitting a proposal. So a combination between yes and it depends. So here's a little bit around the etiquette. How do we do that? How do we make this phone call? Let's face it, the relationship with most foundations can be pretty paternalistic. So unless they're really unique, they want things to be done in a certain way. And that means to have that top person in the organization or somebody with a director title to call if at all possible. And so we're going to look a little bit, we're going to go back to our spreadsheet and talk a little bit about how you can set them up for that call. And I'm just going to, just in the interest of time, you can look at the spreadsheet there. If you want to open yours up and you toggle all the way to the right of the spreadsheet, you'll see that there's a little note section. So we're going to concentrate on that a little bit. And I'm just going to talk through this while we have this slide in front of us. And you can play around with your spreadsheet if you feel like that's helpful to you. So when funders put literally every single bit of information on their website, it can be really hard to come up with a reason to call. And you should never call and ask about something that they've already given you, right? So you don't want to call and say, hey, what are your deadlines for funding requests when it's clearly right there on the website? They're not going to be happy with you if you do that. So the reason why you come up with a question and you make this phone call is you're introducing yourself and you're starting to build a relationship with them. And so you want to have a clear strategy. Remember, you want to appear informed and prepared. So look through your research and come up with a few questions. My favorite is always, because we're applying for a first time, we want to ensure our proposal is in line with your board's current priorities. And we notice from looking at your most recent grants X. And most of all, don't even bother to apply if you can't meet their expectations. So this call is to just make sure you can meet their expectations or that your project fits in their priorities. And you can ask the program officer how much money they think that you can request or what percentage of the project their board might be interested in funding. If they give you a number, don't exceed it. I've seen people go, oh, I want to ask for more than that. That's kind of a big no-no. Ask for what they tell you to ask. They know what they're talking about and you want to respect their position in the organization. And then you might want to share your spreadsheet with whomever in the organization will be making this call. When you show them your strategy, how much you think you should ask, what kind of funding, are we going to ask for general operating, program specific, capacity building, and those kinds of things. And I think our current pandemic landscape really provides an opportunity to make this call meaningful because a lot of funders have refocused their efforts in this time. And it's an opening to be able to call them and say, hey, I see that this is how you've traditionally given grants, but I know that things are different right now. And it looks like you have been doing some emergency funding. So can we talk for a minute about what your interests, your current interests are in this immediate landscape? So All right, so hopefully that's clear to you how to use the spreadsheet. You have it in front of you. So I don't feel like it's necessary to go back to it, but certainly in the Q&A, you can ask questions about it if you'd like. So time to take a breath. I know I gave you a lot of information here, and in an effort to help you refocus back to some doable next steps, here's a short list of things you can do right now, this week. Set up a spreadsheet. You can use the one that I gave you by duplicating it and putting it in your own Drive file. You can't type right. I've restricted use, so you have to duplicate it and save it to your own Drive, and then you'll be able to do whatever you want with it. Identify what you need to fund. So do you need to fund programs, general operating? Do you need a new van? Do you need technology? Identify current and recent funders of your organization. Some of you earlier said you're not sure, you're sort of familiar. So get a spreadsheet or a list of current and past funders. You're going to want to go back and look at funders probably over the last 8 to 10 years, just to see if there's any where your relationships have fallen off, and then have a conversation with your executive director or development director and see what they know. Find out if you have access to the Foundation Center. You already have access to Guidestar, so no problem there. You just go to guidestar.org and then talk to your executive director and or development director about how they see your role in fund development. This might be very clear in your VAD, and it might be a little bit opaque at this point if things are changing in your organization, as they are in so many, and because it takes a while to get through a VISTA grant application. So sometimes your organization applied before, and now it's COVID time and things have changed. So, okay. Resources, again, just want to mention a couple more resources that are available to you on your VISTA website. You can use Writing Winning Proposals as a follow-up on demand webinar. And this was that was a 2018 webinar, but it should probably still be in a lot of ways totally up to date, except for when it comes to COVID. So something to think about there. All right. That brings us to the end of my part. I look forward to the Q&A session that's going to come up in a minute, but first we want to make sure that you do your evaluation. So I'm going to hand it off.
Yeah, thanks, Mo. Yeah, we'll get to the Q&A in just a second. But just a reminder, yeah, please, if you have just a few moments to complete some feedback on the webinar. It's something that we constantly review the evaluations. We look for ideas for future webinars because we have some flexibility there. So we take your comments in high regard. So please, there should be a link posted to the chat in just a second for the evaluation. And typically it also opens up in your browser as you exit Zoom after the webinar. So but if you want to go ahead and start on that, we'll start taking a look at the questions that have come in. So give us a second. Let me pull up. We have a few, and I doubt we'll be able to get to all of them, unfortunately. But if you have questions, you can continue to submit them here. We'll try to tackle as many as possible. So Mo, start you out with a really quick one. Acronyms, just because we're all full of acronyms. Just someone was checking if you could clarify what RFP stands for.
RFP, I think I said it so quickly. I'm so sorry. I'm Midwestern fast talker. And I'm going to type this in, request for proposals is RFP. And I think I also said LOI, which is letter of inquiry. A lot of funders will ask that you do a short 2 or 3 page letter to get them familiar initially with your organization before you submit a full proposal, which can be like 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 pages long. Or a letter of intent, you are correct. So it can be letter of inquiry or letter of intent, meaning letter of intent to apply.
Awesome, thanks. And a great question here. So Nicole mentioned I'm with a subcomponent of an organization, so kind of like a sub-site, Mo, and the subcomponent has a minuscule budget, but the larger organization obviously has a more substantial budget. So how should that be compared when you mentioned, comparing similar budgets to other proposals? If since a lot of vistas do kind of work with a subsite of a larger organization, which should they take into account, the subsite or the larger organization, or both?
It depends on two things. I think it depends, number one, on what their VAT is asking them to do, right? Are they only supposed to be fundraising for that specific arm, or are they a little bit more broad? So you want to obviously stay within the confines of your Vista service. And then the second thing is, how is the organization structured? So for example, I'll use a partner that we have here that I know uses Vistas, and there might be anybody from Reading Partners out there. Reading Partners uses a lot of Vistas, and they have a national organization, and they actually use a national Form 990 for their regional sites or their local sites, but each regional or local site fundraises independently of the national organization. Whereas there are other organizations that fundraise, they don't fundraise independently. They fundraise with the larger organization. So it sort of depends on how you're structured, but that's something I would talk to a leader in your organization about, which is what kind of funding do you want me to look for? And is that project or program specific funding? Am I only looking for funding for my arm, or do you want me to open up my search? I mean, I'm there anyway. So do you want me to give you strategies maybe for larger general operating funding? It really depends on the way that your organization is structured. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Mo. So looking at a few others, a couple questions on kind of distinguishing government funding. In particular, there was one on our poll question that we had with regards, should you call beforehand before submitting the proposal? Is that still recommended for those trying to get government funding to call the agency providing the grant prior to submitting the proposal? Does it work the same way?
No, largely it doesn't, unless there is a very clear point person. And it really, again, it depends on the structure. So for example, a lot of local city governments give like I always want to say the old punk rock club in New York, CBGB, but it's CDBG funding, community development block grant funding. And usually for those kinds of funds, there will be local information sessions and a specific contact that you can call or follow up with. And sometimes you'll work actually pretty closely with that person on that request. Whereas large federal requests, usually you just send those out. But also, like, Vista is a really interesting example. Before you go through the Vista application process, you absolutely talk to the program officer a lot before you request. So again, it really depends on where you're requesting it from and the way that grant is structured. But the RFP should give you information. If there is a specific point person, I would call them. Why not? Why not ask if they think you have a good shot?
Cool. Thanks, Mo. Couple questions, 2 or 3 actually came in on Guidestar specifically. One is are you only allowed the free account for organizations that have 501c3 status, or is Guidestar available to state government organizations?
Those are really good questions. The first question is, I know that there are some free resources that you can use. You should. I don't see any reason why not having 501c3 status would be a barrier in certain examples. So for example, your organization might be functioning as they might have a fiscal sponsor. And in that case, you can still put your organization on the website and list the fiscal sponsors 990 And I think that there is probably a way to put your organization in if it has a fiscal sponsorship and still give all the information that they require. If you are pending 501c3 status and don't have a fiscal sponsor, in that case, I don't know the answer to that. And in terms of government entities, you know what? I do not know the answer for that because I do not work for a government entity. So if somebody knows that and wants to put it in the chat, or if when you get off of this, go figure it out. And thank you, Roxanne, for getting the CBGBs and the CDBGs mixed up, by the way.
Thank you so much, Mo. We have about 1 minute left, so we'll just wrap up on these last just couple slides. To be respectful of everyone's time, don't want to go over. Apologies that we couldn't get through quite all the questions. There were a lot of good ones coming in. But just a FYI, upcoming webinar in January for strategies for sustainability. And yes, that should be 2021. Apologies. I imagine there's going to be a lot of those mistakes coming up, but good riddance 2020. Let's try not to make that mistake anymore. I don't want any more of that 2020. But yes, it'll be 3 to 4 p.m. Thursday, January 28th. And Mo, I just wanted to, really thank you for sharing your tips, your guidance, and the information today. This was great and super helpful. Probably could have done it for like 4 or 5 more hours to just soak in all that information. It's much appreciated. And thank you. Yeah. And thanks to all the Vistas too. Thanks everyone who joined and your participation in the chat and poll and for serving as an AmeriCorps Vista. I mean, it's so appreciated what you do in your communities. And we wish all the success in the world this year and next year. And this concludes our webinar. We hope to see you next month on our January webinar. And thank you for your service.
Can I hang out for a second, Chris, and answer some questions? Will they be able to read the Q&A?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thanks, Mo. If you can submit a question, waiting a response, there will be some answers coming in the Q&A. But in terms of audio, we'll go on mute. So they'll just be answered privately.
Sounds great. I won't be able to get to all of them, everybody, but I'm picking a few here and there, and it says answered. You'll be able to see. Thank you for everybody for your service.
Thank you.